20 years ago, I was abducted by a so-called family friend, held in captivity for 17 long days.
After 16 days and an intensive police search, 10-year-old Katie Beers finally turned up, waving and smiling at photographers, apparently in good health.
December 28th, 1992, I was a detective lieutenant. I received a phone call. It was apparently an abduction of a 9-year-old child.
In the days before her disappearance, Katie spends the weekend at the home of Sal and Linda. They throw her a 10th birthday party.
9 years old, chained by the neck inside a soundproof wooden coffin, buried alive beneath a 200-pound concrete slab. Under the dim light of a meticulously planned $5,000 underground bunker, her captor had carefully laid out a pair of 101 Dalmatians pajamas on a filthy mattress. While a sick CCTV camera system watched her every single breath, she screamed until her throat bled, but absolutely no one could hear her. This entire nightmare had been engineered for over a year and a half. The horrifying truth is, the monster who built this dungeon wasn't hiding under her bed. He was the man she loved and trusted more than anyone else in the world. How does a little girl survive and psychologically manipulate her own personal demon? Does this seem weird to you? Let's dive in. December 28, 1992, it's exactly 2 days before Katie Beers' 10th birthday. She hopped into the front seat of a pickup truck belonging to a man she affectionately called Big John. He was supposed to be taking her to Spaceplex, her absolute favorite arcade in Long Island, to celebrate. To Katie, Big John was her protector, the only adult who actually showed her consistent kindness in a life filled with trauma, but they never made it to the arcade. Instead, John drove her back to his house. He told her he had a new video game he wanted her to try out in his office. But the moment that office door clicked shut, the gentle, childlike energy Big John always carried completely vanished. His eyes went dead. In a split second of pure survival instinct, while John was distracted, 9-year-old Katie quietly reached for the phone on his desk. She dialed 911. With her heart pounding out of her chest, she cupped the receiver and whispered frantically into the line, "I'm on Saxon Avenue." But before she could say another word, John spun around, violently ripped the phone from her tiny hands, and slammed her against the wall. This is where the story takes a dark turn. He wasn't just a friendly neighbor who snapped in the heat of the moment. He was a highly calculated predator. Right in front of a terrified Katie, John peeled back the carpet on his office floor to reveal a hidden trapdoor. Using a heavy-duty mechanical pulley system hooked to the ceiling, he hoisted up a massive, 200-pound solid concrete slab. Beneath it was a black void dropping straight into the earth. He forced the little girl down a narrow passageway into a custom-built, soundproof wooden vault. I gotta be honest with you, reading the actual specs of this bunker made my blood run cold. John Esposito had spent over $5,000 and a year and a half meticulously constructing this underground prison. He even installed a closed-circuit television, CCTV system so he could sit in his house and watch her every single move, 24 hours a day. This wasn't a random crime of opportunity. Every nail, every piece of soundproofing foam, and those little 101 Dalmatians pajamas waiting on the dirty mattress, it was all designed specifically to trap Katie. Once he had her down in the underground chamber, the psychological torture began. He handed her a small handheld tape recorder. He told her exactly what she was going to say, making her practice it over and over again, until her fear sounded perfectly believable. With nowhere to run and a heavy metal chain now fastened tightly around her neck, Katie pressed the button and was forced to speak into the microphone. "Aunt Linda, a man kidnapped me and he has a knife." "Oh no, here he comes. I gotta go." John took the tape, climbed the ladder, and sealed that 200-pound concrete slab right above her head, leaving a 9-year-old girl in pitch-black silence while he went out to execute the next phase of his twisted master plan.
To the FBI lab for further analysis.
Analysis that leads to a major break in the case.
Police say this is the phone booth where Katie Beers made her distressed phone call to her godmother.
It's located on Route 347, less than a mile away from the indoor amusement park where Katie was allegedly abducted.
With Katie buried alive in the suffocating darkness of that tight, 6 by 7 foot underground bunker, John Esposito grabbed his keys, took the tape recorder, and drove away. He headed straight to a payphone right across the street from Spaceplex. He dropped a coin in, dialed Katie's Aunt Linda's number, and held the little recorder up to the receiver. He pressed play, unleashing that chilling, forced plea for help onto the answering machine as bait. Then, the performance of a lifetime began. John walked into the crowded, neon-lit arcade. He established his alibi, claiming he gave Katie a $5 bill to go get some tokens while he played a round of pinball. A few minutes later, he started frantically running around the arcade. He approached the Spaceplex staff, visibly shaking, hyperventilating, and clutching Katie's winter coat and hat to his chest. He begged them to page her name over the intercom. I gotta be honest with you, researching this guy's ability to manipulate people is just terrifying. His acting was absolutely flawless. He was literally bawling his eyes out in front of the employees and the police when they arrived. He played the role of the devastated, protective family friend so perfectly that nobody, not even the seasoned officers on the scene, suspected him for a single second. Within hours, the area was swarming with law enforcement. Officers were digging through dumpsters, K9 units were scouring the surrounding freezing woods, and helicopters were circling above. They interviewed dozens of patrons, desperately searching for a 4-foot-tall girl in a Scotty dog shirt. But there was absolutely zero trace of her. It was as if she had simply vanished into thin air. Meanwhile, back at the house, Aunt Linda played the answering machine message for the police. The entire room went dead silent as they listened to Katie screaming about a man with a knife. It painted a horrifying picture, a random, violent predator snatching a little girl right out of a public space. But lead detective Dominic Varone felt a nagging pit in his stomach. Something about that tape just didn't sit right. Think about it, how does a terrified 9-year-old, actively running for her life from an armed maniac, have the time to find a payphone, deposit a coin, wait for the beep of an answering machine, and deliver a perfectly clear, structured message before getting grabbed? He immediately sent the recording to the FBI's Advanced Acoustics Lab for deep analysis. And days later, the results blew the entire case wide open. The FBI experts told Varone that there was absolutely no background noise on that tape. No arcade sirens, no passing cars, no wind. The acoustic signature proved the audio was recorded inside a tiny, enclosed, soundproof environment and then physically played back into a telephone receiver. The Spaceplex abduction wasn't real, it was a phantom. A completely staged illusion meant to send the police on a wild goose chase, while the real monster hid in plain sight. What do you guys think? Who could possibly mastermind and execute a completely fabricated kidnapping plot this insane and perfect?
After 16 days and an intensive police search, 10-year-old Katie Beers finally turned up, waving and smiling at photographers, apparently in good health, as police drove her away from the home of John Esposito.
The FBI's bombshell revelation changed everything. Detective Varone and his team immediately stopped looking for a phantom kidnapper in the woods and started looking right at the man who was standing next to them the entire time. They zoomed in on Big John Esposito. At first glance, John was the fun uncle. He was a 43-year-old contractor who still lived with his parents, but he had converted their massive garage into a literal toy store and arcade for all the neighborhood kids. He proudly flaunted his involvement with the prestigious Big Brothers Big Sisters organization, offering free mentorship and a safe haven for vulnerable youth like Katie. But when detectives pulled his permanent record, the polished facade crumbled instantly. They uncovered that John Esposito had never actually been an official member of the Big Brothers program. He had applied years ago, sure, but the second the organization initiated their rigorous background check, John withdrew his application and vanished. Why? Because 15 years prior, in 1977, John had been arrested for attempting to lure a 12-year-old boy into his car outside a local shopping mall. He had somehow slipped through the cracks of the justice system back then, walking away free to continue hunting. The police realized they weren't dealing with a grieving family friend. They were dealing with a seasoned, calculated predator who had been hiding in plain sight for over a decade.
Police say Esposito kept Katie in a dungeon-like room 7 feet beneath his garage. At an afternoon press conference, police described the ghoulish conditions that Katie withstood.
You had to use a block and tackle to lift a 200-pound slab of concrete and then drop down into a narrow shaft into a small room underground, 6 by 7, apparently wood around the interior. It was a very small...
Within days, the media caught wind of the escalating suspicion. News vans swarmed Esposito's quiet, suburban street, their cameras aimed squarely at his front door. Police cruisers lined the block. Detectives secured multiple search warrants and descended upon the property. They brought in highly trained K9 units, their dogs sniffing every inch of the massive garage, the arcade machines, the walls, and the manicured front lawn. They combed through the house not once, but twice. And through it all, John Esposito was standing right there. He didn't run. He didn't hide inside with the curtains drawn. Instead, he walked right out onto his front porch, casually leaning against the railing. He gave interviews to the reporters camped on his grass, looking straight into the camera lenses with a terrifyingly calm, almost arrogant smirk. He maintained his innocence, claiming he just wanted to give Katie a good birthday and that the police were wasting precious time harassing him instead of finding the real kidnapper. He looked like a man who genuinely believed he was smarter than the FBI, the K9s, and every single detective on Long Island. But what no one knew was, just a few feet away, beneath the very ground the reporters were standing on, Katie Beers was slowly suffocating in darkness. She was chained by the neck, locked inside a wooden coffin, buried more than 7 feet deep under a 200-pound concrete slab, listening to the heavy footsteps of the police dogs pacing right above her head.
Years ago, I was abducted by a so-called family friend, held in captivity for 17 long days in an underground dungeon that he had constructed just specifically for me. Prior to that, my life wasn't any better. I was abused by my godmother.
To understand how a smart, resilient 9-year-old girl could walk straight into a predator's trap so willingly, we have to hit pause and rewind. We have to look at the absolute nightmare that was her everyday life. Because the tragedy of Katie Beers didn't start in that underground bunker. It started in the house she grew up in, a place so toxic, it honestly makes you sick to your stomach. Katie was born into a world that basically didn't want her. Her biological mother, Marilyn, worked grueling 12-hour shifts as a cab driver and essentially abandoned Katie when she was just 2 months old, dumping her into the care of a woman named Linda, her godmother, and Linda's husband, Sal. But Linda was no savior. She turned this little girl into a literal, modern-day slave. We're talking a Cinderella story, but 1,000 times darker and more brutal. Katie was kept isolated and rarely allowed to go to school. Instead, she spent her days scrubbing floors, doing the laundry, and cleaning toilets. If she made a mistake or dared to complain, Linda's punishments were horrifying. She would lock Katie inside a tiny, cramped pantry for hours on end, while she went out to the movies. She even put out lit cigarettes right on Katie's bare skin. But somehow, the physical torture wasn't even the worst of it. The real monster of the house was Linda's husband, Sal. Sal had been sexually abusing Katie since she was just a toddler.
I was abused by my godmother's husband and sexually abused by him also, and also neglected by my biological mother.
That was her reality. That was the only life she had ever known. Am I the only one who finds this suspicious? I mean, neighbors literally saw this tiny, barefoot girl walking down to the strip mall in the freezing rain to buy cigarettes for her godmother. Teachers saw the cigarette burns, the fading bruises, the sheer exhaustion in her eyes. Child Protective Services even visited the house multiple times! Yet every single adult just turned a blind eye. They completely, utterly failed her. So, when you look at it from Katie's perspective, her daily life was an inescapable, living hell. And then out of nowhere, along comes Big John Esposito. John didn't hit her, he didn't scream at her, he didn't burn her. Instead, he built a literal children's paradise in his garage. He brought her giant Barbie dream houses for her birthday, bought her video games, took her out for Slurpees, and actually spoke to her like she mattered. To a deeply traumatized child who had never known a single ounce of genuine love or safety, John wasn't a creepy, manipulative predator. To Katie, he was her guardian angel. He was her ultimate protector and her only escape from the horrors waiting for her back in Linda's house. That's exactly why she hopped into the front seat of his pickup truck that December afternoon without a second of hesitation. She trusted him completely. She had absolutely no idea that she was just trading one agonizing hell for an even darker, much deeper one. Let's go back down into the bunker, because what happened next is the defining moment of Katie Beer's life, and honestly, one of the most incredible displays of human survival I have ever researched. For 17 agonizing days, Katie was locked inside that 6'7" concrete box. She was chained by the neck, forced into a soundproof wooden coffin, and entirely at the mercy of John Esposito. Every single day, he would climb down the ladder, unseal the vault, and subject her to unthinkable horrors. But Katie didn't cry. She didn't scream. She didn't beg. Because of the severe, relentless torment she had endured her entire childhood at the hands of Linda and Sal, Katie's brain had already developed a terrifyingly efficient defense mechanism. She knew how to completely detach herself from physical pain and terror. To her, this wasn't a sudden, shocking loss of innocence. It was just a different kind of monster. She had been trained her whole life to survive monsters, and that survival instinct kicked into overdrive. While John was out playing the grieving uncle for the news cameras, Katie was observing everything. She figured out his schedule. She knew exactly how many steps he took down the ladder. During one of the rare moments, she was left unchained to use the makeshift toilet. She scoured the tiny room and found a spare key John had accidentally left on a shelf. She didn't try to use it right away. Instead, she quietly slipped it under her dirty mattress, waiting for the perfect moment. She also realized the danger of the food he brought her. John offered her soda, chocolate bars, and meals, but Katie, terrified he was trying to slip something into them to force her into submission, flat out refused to eat anything he prepared. She survived solely on packaged waffles because she knew they hadn't been tampered with. When John, feeling the massive pressure from the police swarming his property, came down to the bunker and begged her to play dead so he could take a photo and send it to the cops to close the case, Katie looked him dead in the eye and refused. She knew that the second that photo was taken, her usefulness to him was over, and it would be a guaranteed death sentence. What struck me the most was, she was a 10-year-old child, sitting in the dark, chained like a dog, and she became the absolute mastermind of her own rescue. She didn't just survive, she went on the offensive. Katie started psychologically manipulating John Esposito.
I was asking John Esposito questions about how I was going to go to school, what I was going to do to survive. I wanted to get married and have kids, and he would always have witty remarks right away, like, oh, you'll have kids with me, you'll marry me, you'll do this with me. So I would always tell him, no, I don't want to do that.
She turned the tables, interrogating him. She asked him, if I'm going to be your wife when I turn 18, how am I going to go to school? How am I going to learn anything down here in the dark? She played on his twisted fantasy of a future together. She promised him that if he let her out, she would stay completely loyal to him. She would run into the woods, blame the entire kidnapping on her abusive Uncle Sal, and tell the police that John was the hero who actually saved her. She was so convincing, so relentlessly strategic, that she even had to act as his therapist. When the police surveillance outside became too intense, John started cracking. He came down to the bunker, panicked and exhausted, and told Katie he was going to kill himself because there was no way out. Katie knew if he died, she would be buried alive forever. So, this brilliant, traumatized little girl had to literally talk a serial predator out of suicide, convincing him to stay alive just long enough so that she could too. Up above ground, the suffocation John Esposito was feeling was entirely of his own making. Detective Dominic Verone and the Suffolk County Police Department were practically living on his front lawn. They trailed his pickup truck everywhere he went. They tapped his phones. The news vans never left. The pressure was mounting to an unbearable degree, and John, the man who thought he was a criminal mastermind,
And she's in the apartment behind the wall, and my heart dropped because I said, we searched those premises, and there's no way a living girl could be beneath a wall. He had to lead us to it. There's no way we could go in alone. He had to show us all the steps, including using the battery-operated wrench to open the doorway passageway.
was rapidly losing his mind. Between the relentless police surveillance outside and Katie's terrifyingly calm, calculated psychological warfare down in the bunker, John was utterly broken. He hadn't slept in days. He looked gaunt and physically ill, the perfect crime. He spent a year and a half engineering, and $5,000 to construct had turned into a suffocating trap for him. Finally, on January 13, 1993, 17 days after Katie vanished into the earth, John cracked. He called his lawyer and his family together. Looking like a ghost of the arrogant man who had smiled for the cameras 2 weeks prior, he uttered the 5 words that would end the manhunt: "She is behind the wall." Within hours, John Esposito was leading a team of detectives and his lawyer through the bizarre, 30-step process required to unseal the tomb. He walked them into his office, pulled away the heavy wooden cabinet, rolled back the carpet, and exposed the vinyl flooring. Then, he hooked the mechanical block and tackle to the ceiling, slowly hoisting the massive 200-pound concrete slab into the air. As the slab lifted, light flooded into the pitch-black 6-7-foot bunker for the first time in over 2 weeks. The officers peered down into the custom-built dungeon, fully expecting to find a tragedy. But instead they saw Katie Beers, and she was alive. When the officers dropped down into the underground chamber and told her she was safe, the 10-year-old girl who had just spent her birthday chained by the neck in a soundproof coffin looked up at them and simply smiled. It was the smile of a survivor who had just outplayed a monster. They lifted her out of the darkness and brought her up into the house. But this is where the story takes a turn that genuinely makes me furious. Instead of immediately rushing a severely traumatized, kidnapped child to the hospital for a full medical evaluation, or even getting her the hell out of that house, the police decided to conduct their initial interview right then and there. They sat a 10-year-old girl down in the living room, directly next to the man who had just spent 17 days torturing her. They made her sit next to John Esposito and answer questions about her captivity, while he was sitting right there, staring her down. It was an astonishing failure of protocol and basic human empathy. Drop your thoughts in the comments. What would you have done? If you were the officer who just pulled that little girl out of a concrete hole, would you have ever let her sit next to her captor for an hour? Or would you have gotten her out of there immediately? Finally, after that incredibly mishandled and completely bizarre interview in the living room, officers led Katie out of the house. She was put into the back of a squad car, navigating through an absolute sea of flashing cameras and screaming reporters. She leaned her head against the cold glass, closed her eyes, and left that $5,000 nightmare behind her forever. But the real fight for justice, and for her own soul, was just beginning. John Esposito, the man who genuinely thought he was an untouchable criminal mastermind, was completely stripped of his arrogant smirk. In 1994, he pleaded guilty to kidnapping and was sentenced to 15 years to life in prison. But the massive fallout from Katie's abduction had an unexpected, incredibly powerful ripple effect. The blinding spotlight of the national media finally forced law enforcement to look deeply into the horrific realities of her home life. Because of this intense scrutiny, her abusive uncle, Sal Ingaleri, could no longer hide in the shadows. He was officially charged, held accountable for years of heinous, unspeakable acts, and sentenced to 12 years behind bars. And here is the absolute, undeniable poetic justice of this entire case: neither of these monsters ever breathed free air again. Sal died in his prison cell in 2009. John Esposito spent years rotting behind bars, repeatedly being denied parole. During every single hearing, he consistently lied to the board, claiming he never committed those unspeakable acts against Katie while she was trapped in the bunker. But finally, in September 2013, during yet another parole hearing, John broke down. He officially admitted, on the record, that he did commit those unspeakable acts against her. It was the ultimate validation Katie had been waiting 2 decades to hear. And guess what happened? Just hours after making that confession and being denied parole once again, John Esposito was found dead in his cell from natural causes. The universe literally collected its debt on the exact same day he told the truth. The chilling reality finally came to light. The most terrifying monsters don't hide in the closet or under the bed. They don't always look like scary strangers lurking in a dark alley. Sometimes, they wear the guise of a trusted family friend, a godparent, or the friendly guy handing out video games and Barbie dolls. But Katie's story isn't just a tragedy about evil men. It is the ultimate testament to the priceless, unbreakable power of human survival. After she was rescued, Katie never returned to her biological mother, and she certainly never went back to Linda's house of horrors. She officially became a ward of the state, and was placed into the foster care system. For the very first time in her 10 years of existence, Katie found out what a real family actually looked like. She was taken in by a wonderful couple, Barbara and Ted, who gave her the stability, unconditional love, and protection she had always been denied. They fiercely shielded her from the relentless media. She got to be a normal kid. She went to school, joined the volleyball team, acted in school plays, made actual friends, and finally experienced a childhood where she wasn't treated like a servant or prey. Of course, surviving the bunker didn't mean the trauma just magically disappeared overnight. For years, Katie utilized that same incredible defense mechanism that kept her alive. She boxed up the memories and shoved them deep down. She battled severe PTSD well into her adulthood, but Katie is a fighter. In 2013, she decided to take her power back completely. She co-authored her memoir, Buried Memories, confronting her demons head-on. The book became a massive New York Times bestseller, allowing her to own her narrative and help other trauma survivors today. Katie is a highly successful accountant. She lives a beautiful, peaceful life in Pennsylvania with a loving husband and 2 children. She broke the generational cycle of trauma entirely. As Katie herself perfectly put it, "I try not to be sad about what happened, because ultimately it made me who I am today."
As long as you have the right support system, counseling, and different things like that, that you can overcome. You have to have the right mindset to overcome, and that's one thing that my support system was able to give me.
I gotta be honest with you guys, cases like this leave an incredibly heavy mark on my soul, but seeing her rise from the ashes is just beyond inspiring. Yet, the systemic failure of the adults around her still haunts me. What do you guys think really happened in the minds of those who ignored her suffering? I gotta be honest, I'll keep you posted if I find anything new. Thanks so much for watching, and for all your comments. Appreciate you guys.